he doesn't need any introduction because he's a well-known personality icon in medical fraternity. But yes, I would like to say that Dr. Mehta is a chairman of Medanta Institute of Critical Care and Anesthesiology, Medanta, the Medicity from Delhi, Gurgaon. I'm happy to have Dr. Mehta as our speaker and moderator both. And Dr. Mehta will be speaking today on echinocandins, a ray of hope. Post that, I will just give the brief introduction. I'm from Concord Biotech Limited.
Hello.
What company is all about and what we are doing differently. And post my introduction, I will invite Dr. Om Srivastava. He is from Sir HN Reliance Hospital, Mumbai. He is a very famous ID specialist. And today, Dr. Om Srivastava will discuss and deliver a talk on current perspectives on the management of gram-positive infections. And after that, there would be a question and answer session, which will be handled by our medical advisor, Dr. Hiten Saresa. And we will be kind enough to have the answers from Dr. Yatin Mehta and Dr. Om Srivastava. So let's start this webinar. I would like to welcome Dr. Yatin Mehta to speak on echinocandins, a ray at hope.
Thank you, Anu. Thank you all for coming. May I have the presentation, please?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about echinocandins, ray of hope. Next one, please. So I bring you greetings from Medanta, the Medicity. This is outskirts of Delhi. This is where I work. Next one, please. So this is a little simplified version of what it is. So basically, fungal infections or invasive fungal infection can be divided into three forms. One is the proven invasive fungal disease, which means that there is a definitive evidence of fungal infection, which is either by tissue diagnosis or by cultures. Then there is probable fungal disease. So the host factors are favoring mycological infections, and there is significant suspicion of fungal infection. And then there's a possible invasive fungal disease where the host factors are favorable, but they're clinically or mycologically, there's not enough evidence to prove it. So it's possible. Next one, please. So now, why does fundamentally the transmission happens? Well, there is a barrier is broken, mostly the mucosa, because there's a lot of candida also in the gut or upper respiratory tract, and depending on which fungus you are talking about. Then initially there is colonization, where there is no disease symptoms. There are no disease symptoms. The fungus is there, the evidence is there, but there are no clinical or systemic symptoms of fungal disease. And then there is gross fungal infection, where there are clinical manifestations of the fungal infection. Next one, please. And there are there is three interacting factors which will determine the invasive fungal infection. One is the host factors, high risk groups. I'll come to that a bit later. Immunocompromised patients and so on. Then mucosal barrier breakage. And the third is presence of opportunities fungi in the ICU, maybe in your air conditioning duct or in your water or whatever. Next one, please. So this is what I talked about. Colonization, when there's the evidence of the fungus there in tissues which is not supposed to be, but there is no systemic manifestations. And when it becomes invasive, then it becomes invasive fungal infection with definitive signs and symptoms of sepsis, along with other evidence of fungus. Next one, please. So what are the main problems? The troublesome facts are the incidence in India is higher than the Western incidence. I'll come to that. In India is the third commonest infection in the sepsis, cause of sepsis in the ICU, while in the Western world it is fourth commonest. So the mortality is fairly high. It's a poorly recognized thing that mortality is about 40% in invasive fungal infection, except for mucor, it will be probably higher. And unfortunately, it takes much longer to diagnose it than to diagnose a bacterial infection. Next one. So this is a global burden of fungal sepsis in different scenarios in oncology and so on. And you can see ICU has a fairly high incidence of sepsis. Next one, please. No, I think you need to make the slide a bit longer. My title slide is coming. Okay, the burden, no. Yeah. So why the burden in India is very high? Next one. Why? One of the reasons is extensive misuse of antibiotics. So prolonged misuse of antibiotics will lead to fungal sepsis. The mycological facilities in the labs are very dismal. If you look at it, except for the major cities in the peripheries, it is very difficult to diagnose it. Climatic conditions can also make a difference. Warm and humid climate is favoring fungal sepsis. And there is very little credible data in the Indian scenario. Next one. Okay. Now, as I said, there's a fundamental difference. India, Candida sepsis or fungal sepsis is the third most common, while in the Western world, Candida sepsis is the fourth commonest. In Western hospitals or healthcare facilities, Candida albicans is the commonest, while it's Candida non-albicans Candida, primarily tropicalis in the Indian scenario. Tropicalis is more than albicans, is more than parasilosis, while in the Western world, albicans is more than glabrata and then parasilosis. The incidence is, this is Chakravarti's data, incidence of 6.5 cases per 1,000 ICU admissions, while it is almost half in the Western ICUs. Next one, please. And these were the trends over the years. You can see from 1999 to 2008, the ICU, the ward incidence is a bit lower. The ICU incidence is higher, the lighter one in ICU, as you can see. And the incidence has going up every year, both in the ward as well as in the ICU. And it was almost 30% in this study in the ICUs over a period of time. Next one, please. And you can see albicans has remained almost static, while non-albicans significantly increased. Next one. And as the same thing which is shown graphically, the albicans is less and non-albicans is about 93%. And commonest among this is, as I said, Candida tropicalis. Next one, please. This was a famous paper by Arunalok Chakravarti. Incidence is a multi-center large study involving whole of India, northwest, south, and east, and also private hospitals as well as public hospitals, that is medical colleges. And what did they find? The incidence was high, twice that of the Western population, 6.5 per 1,000 ICU admissions. North, surprisingly, was a higher incidence than West. Significantly, even non-neutropenic had a high incidence in this, which is a bit surprising. And the mean duration at which it appeared or it was diagnosed was 8 days. Next one, please. And again, the same division of this, as you can see, the light blue is Candida tropicalis, while this is Candida albicans, and this is Candida parasilosis, and this is glabrata, and these are the others. Next one, please. And Candida rugosa and oris and Homolini are getting commoner in the public hospitals more so. So this I have already talked about, and the resistance rates against fluconazole were 5.2% in albicans more than 4%, more than 2.6% in tropicalis and 1.5% in glabrata. Removal of central venous lines and early start of antifungal therapy affected the mortality, 30-day survival. And as I said earlier, the crude mortality was 44%. This was in EPIC-2 studies. EPIC-3 study you're going to see very soon in Lancet, which also is similar mortality with Candida sepsis. Next one, please. And what about timing? We have classic Kumar's paper where it shows every hour of delay in antibiotic therapy increases the mortality. And this paper also shows significant increase in mortality by delay in antifungal therapy, which invariably happens. Very few people, would be starting it within 12 hours unless you have a very high degree of suspicion. Next one, please. And again, initiation of this was specifically for fluconazole, and when it was from the culture date, the delay in starting, and how the mortality increases substantially if there is a 2 days delay. Next one. So we are looking at the risk factors, which is organism related, which is virulence, the density, that means how number of organisms, multiple sites of colonization is a risk factor, and how tightly it adheres to the surfaces, particularly the biosurfaces. The patient related is the patient's own immunity, mucosal breakdown, moist skin surfaces will lead to it, and invasive devices in the body will also. And third is factor which affects the risk is the drug related. If the patient is already more than 2 antibiotics, he is on H2 blockers, which many patients in the ICU would be on. Steroids, which many patients again would be on. TPN, which few would be on, particularly more so with lipid emulsions. Next one, please. So, summarizing the risk factors, I am not going to go into the different scores. Ostosis score is a common one which is used. But more than 3 antibiotics, longer the use of antibiotics, longer the stay in the ICU, longer the mechanical ventilation, major abdominal surgery, other bacterial sepsis, immunosuppression, neutropenia, parenteral nutrition, presence of central lines, diabetes, colonization more than 2, and candiduria more than 1 million is a risk factor, are risk factors. Next one. So when will you start? Every patient, obviously you can't put an antifungal therapy, particularly iron antifungal therapy. Well, patient, despite antibiotics, is not getting better. Obviously, I presume you've taken source control into consideration. Multiple colonization. You could say, 2 sites of Candida colonization. Longer the patient in the ICU, immunosuppressed patient, and obviously presence of central lines will make you wary. How do you treat it when you're getting it? Well, the therapy is either maybe prophylaxis. There is no infection, but there is a high risk group like HSCT or solid organ transplant. Then there is empirical therapy. When there is possible infection, high risk group with persistent fever despite antibiotics, and then third is a preemptive, which is a probable infection, high index of suspicion, but no confirmed of diagnostic proof, that is preemptive therapy. And the fourth one is targeted therapy, where there is a proven infection, either by culture or by tissue diagnosis. Next one. So again, the treatment choices will depend on the severity of the illness, how sick your patient is, what is the affordability, and what is the drug of choice for that particular fungal sepsis. Next one. So this is the spectrum of activity antifungal agents for candidiasis. And as you can see, Ampho-B is effective against all candidas. Triazoles, again, fluconazole is not effective against Krusei or Glabrata. And voriconazole and posaconazole and itraconazole, again, not effective against Glabrata, but they're effective against other candida. Echinocandin, mostly all Anidulafungin, Micafungin or Caspofungin are effective against all candida. Although Anidulafungin has some degree of resistance against parasolosis. Next one, please. And this is on the left-hand side is the Candida albicans, and the right-hand side Candida auris. Auris is more common in public hospitals, where the nursing care and hygiene may be a bit questionable, and unfortunately the incidence is increasing. Next one, please. And this is for molds. The commonest two molds which we are talking about is Aspergillus and Mucor. So fumigatus is the commonest, and you can see amphotericin B will be effective. And out of the triazoles, voriconazole will be the drug of choice for Aspergillus. Usaconazole also is effective, and echinocandins are effective against Aspergillus, but not against Mucorales. Next one, please. So this is invasive aspergillosis, and also if you have some structural work going on in your ICU or in your hospital, that should give you a high degree of suspicion. Also, incidence, particularly in the presence of COVID-19, is substantially high of invasive aspergillosis. Next one, please. So, echinocandins, basically, this is how they work. They will inhibit the glucan synthase inhibitors. So, cell wall and membrane synthesis will be affected, and the cells will, the fungal cells will break down. Next one. Why echinocandins? This was a multi-center, randomized, double-blind, non-inferiority study, large number of patients. Anidulafungin versus fluconazole, and you can see end of IV therapy at 2 weeks and 6 weeks. Success rate was significantly higher with anidulafungin than with fluconazole. Next one, please. And this was a study, the 7 randomized double-blind trials, study drug versus study drugs represent 3 different classes of liposomal amphotericin B, and the 3 echinocandins against fluconazole and voriconazole. And you can see the echinocandin treatment has a substantial mortality benefit, mortality of 1/3, and treatment success compared to the other therapies. Next one, please. So what are the IDSA 2017 guidelines in non-neutropenic patients? Now let me just remind you that incidence of candidemia is significantly increasing in non-neutropenic patients also. Earlier it was thought it was only neutropenic patients who are vulnerable. And these are the doses, which I will not get into details of the 3 echinocandins. And alternative to fluconazole, well, key considerations, IDSA guidelines. Fluconazole is acceptable only in select patients. Patients are not critically ill. There is no fluconazole resistance demonstrated in your cultures or in your environment, and patient is a very low risk, and he has had no administration of fluconazole or triazoles earlier. Amphotericin B, reasonable cases of intolerance can happen, limited availability, and it's recommended for suspected azole and echinocandin resistant Candida infections. Voriconazole remains the drug of choice, effective, but little advantage over fluconazole, and the side effects, particularly of intravenous voriconazole, remain of serious concern. Next one, please. So this was a comparison study of isavuconazole, which is the new player in the field, against caspofungin in primary treatment of invasive candidiasis. This was a randomized double-blind phase 3 study. IV, then orally isavuconazole. One advantage of isavuconazole is it can be administered orally versus IV caspofungin, and then converted to PO voriconazole. And at least for 14 days. So up to 56 days. And oral therapy was begun after 10 days of IV therapy. But isavuconazole did not meet criteria for non-inferiority to caspofungin. That means you can see statistically it may not be that significant, but caspofungin had a better response than isavuconazole. Next one, please. And invasive fungal infection, again, this was a multi-center prospective randomized double-blind trial. Micafungin versus fluconazole, and these were the primary endpoints, was absence of fungal infection at 4 weeks, and it was 80% with micafungin and 73% with fluconazole. So micafungin remained a superior drug. Next one, please. And coming to combination therapy, it is not used that commonly. It was used for very seriously ill patients, and when the resistance is also questionable, is there. So in this study, they found that casmifungin combined with an azole or with ampho-B is a potential therapy for serious fungal infections after failure of conventional therapy. And this study of this result, the results of this study demonstrate the efficacy of combination antifungal therapy with 71% successful outcome. Next one, please. And you can see fall in survival rate with delayed combination therapy. So earlier you start in this sort of situation, the better it was. Next one. These are the products which I think Anup will talk about. Next one. And again, Anup will talk about that. Next one, please. So thank you for your attention. And I think it's a pleasure to see Dr. Om Srivastava there in his busy schedule from the television and from his patients. He has found time to come here, and we'll address the question answer at the end of the session. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Yatin, sir. I think very nice presentation and deep insight of the antifungals, focusing the echinocandins. And we will also, have some questions we would like to refer to you at the end of this webinar. So before that, I also would like to welcome Dr. Om Srivastava. Dr. Om Srivastava is a very renowned and famous ID specialist in Bombay. As of now, he is responsible for Sir H.N. Reliance Hospital, Mumbai, South Mumbai. Also had been associated with so many hospitals, which I remember is Jaslok as well as Safi and many more. And Dr. Srivastava has also done a very, very good job to treat the patient, especially from the gram-positive infections. So I will just give the 5 minutes in a brief introduction about the Concord Biotech Limited, and after that I will hand over the a charge to Dr. Yatin for his presentation. So coming back to the welcome address, Dr. Om Srivastava actually will deliver a talk on current perspectives on the management of gram-positive infection. So welcome, sir. Welcome, sir, for this webinar, and we will have to have your presentation just after 10 minutes. As far as Concord Biotech Limited is concerned, actually this organization is 20 years old organization in India. It started in 2000 and today is 2020. One minute.
हाँ सुनील मैं देख लेता हूँ मैं अभी वेबिनार पे हूँ मैं बाद में देख के बात करता हूँ
Yeah. So Concord Biotech Limited is based at Ahmedabad, which is 20 years old organization, started in 2000 and completed this journey of 20 years where the Concord Biotech Limited received so many recognitions from the global authorities like US FDA, European GMP, PMDA, Japan, Korean FDA, and also the FDA, Indian FDA, WHO certifications. Actually, going to history, the Concord Biotech, we have taken over from Sanofi, the formerly known as Hext, in 1989. This particular, plant is taken over by Mr. Sudhir Vaid, who is our MD and chairperson. Mr. Sudhir Vaid is actually well-known biotechnologist, and he is well-known to the global authorities. And then we also started separately our, the formulation facility in May 2016. There are two plants. One is the formulation, which is in Balthera, around 40 kilometers from Ahmedabad, and another one is the API facility, which is in Dholka, which is again around 45 kilometers from Ahmedabad. This is a vertically integrated biotechnology company having state-of-the-art manufacturing facilities for largest fermentation and semi-synthetic APIs facility, which is in Dholka. I will talk a little bit on fermentation process, because this is a unique process, and we are only the organization in India who is producing API through this particular process. Actually, fermentation, where we grow the bacteria, we feed them with molasses, we make them happy and healthy, they grow and they multiply, and they produce the raw material. And from that raw material, we convert that raw material into the API. Why this particular raw material from fermentation process is so famous? Because the quality wise, this is very good, and it is accepted by all the global authorities like US FDA, European GMP, PMDA, Japan, Korean FDA, etc. And this particular API is you can say the innovator equivalent to quality. In terms of quality, it is equivalent to the innovator APIs. So that's the reason the demand is too high. I will also show you that where we are exporting this API. Unit 2 is the finished product and formulation facility, which is in Balthera, where we are manufacturing actually the finished products of tacrolimus and mycophenolate tablets and suspension both. It's managed by the well professionals. Most of them are the microbiologists and working under the leadership of Mr. Sukhade, who is our MD and chairperson. So this is some pics of our plants, API as well as formulation both. We also do have the contract manufacturing, where we are manufacturing the finished product and supplying to companies like Biocard and also from multinationals. You can see some collage of API plant where we are showing you the fermentators. We have got actually in this particular plant 29 fermentators, so we are manufacturing 29 APIs, molecules APIs in this particular plant. And this is the formulation facility where we are manufacturing the finished product of tacrolimus and mycophenolate, both tablet and oral suspension. You can see here that as far as the regulatory compliance are concerned, this API facility, we have got the US FDA certification 5 times in 2005, 8, 12, 15, and 17. So that's a big recognition for the organization. We also do have the European GMP received in 2011, 14, and 17 3 times. And in-house R&D recognition from DSIR, also state GMP by Gujarat FDCA, PMDA Japan inspected in 2018 and giving us the certificate, and also Korean FDA inspected. As far as the finished drug formulation facility is concerned, it is successfully undergone the US FDA pre-approval and GMP inspection in July 2017, and we have been recognized by them. WHO GMP we have received in December 2017. Why we are saying this? Because this company is actually focusing the things on quality. We would like to give the finished product as well as the API the world-class quality, providing global quality for the patient benefits. And this is our global presence. You can see that more than 50 countries we are exporting our API. We also have got the NDA certificates from USA, where we are also going to supply the finished products. So this is something which is good to have in India. We are actually following the strategy of our PM, Mr. Narendra Modi, that he is saying that be vocal for local. And actually this is a local organization, but providing the world-class products in terms of quality. So we want to go to global, providing the Indian, manufactured products, API and finished products both. This is the API portfolio. There are 29 molecules we are, manufacturing. They are from immunosuppressants, oncology, antibacterials, and antifungals. And again, one more plant. It is coming up in next December, which is in Baroda, Limbasi, where we are, installing close to 50 fermentators. So there are 50 more molecules which will produce in India and will make it available globally. As far as domestic business is concerned, critical care business we have started last year, so 1 year old. You can see that we have got all the echinocandins, where Dr. Ethan Mehta has spoken about the enidulafungin, micafungin, caspofungin. We have all three by the brand name Enicord, Micacod, and Caspocon. We also do have the all gram positives, where Dr. Srivastava will deliver a talk. We have everything like vancomycin, teicoplanin, phosphomycin. You will be happy to know that these are, the products API we are manufacturing at our Dholka plants, so that we are providing the global quality products to our, patients in India. We also do have the corporate social responsibility. We are maintaining the parks in Ahmedabad. We also doing a lot of activities. We do have the blood donation camps. We have acquired so many villages where we are doing the lot of testing, as well as involved in treatment of the poor patients free of cost. Those activities are also on the, on continuously we are doing on month basis. So this Concord Biotech Limited is not only for the domestic or global business, but also having the social responsibility, where we are doing good job. So this is a brief about the Concord Biotech Limited. Many thanks for your patience listening. Now I will hand over the charge to Dr. Om Srivastava for his talk on gram-positive infections.
Thank you, Anup, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you also, Dr. Yatin Mehta. Always a pleasure to see you, even though it is now in virtual distancing times. And thank you for your generous introduction. I'm going to be speaking on gram-positive infections. Anup, can you have my slides loaded up, please? I think that, while we are also focused on gram-negatives, which is the bigger burden in the ICU, we also probably need to have a look at what is the burden of gram-positive infections and why that might be sometimes neglected when you are covering only with the gram-negative agents. Now, there will be some agents which will have a partial gram-positive and a dominant gram-negative, but I'd like to talk to you about which are the ones that you should be picking in situations where you're dealing with somebody who's got a florid gram-positive infection or a mixed infection. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so gram-positive infections, all right, the burden is actually not small, it's actually quite high. If you look at the various amounts of studies, you'll find that it's variable. It's not simply a matter of having, somebody with a skin infection. You will find that oftentimes there will be central lines that are infected. You'll find that any indwelling device that is indolent may be having a large number of gram-positive infections. And that you'll find that also sometimes it's not the gram-negative infection that will ensure or insist that you have to take out the device. It is oftentimes a gram-positive infection. So when we say that there is a need for source control, we need to also look at what would be happening if there are higher infections of gram-positive bacteria in ICUs or wards in patients where you may be better advised to cover with gram-positives along with the gram-negatives cover based on the figures that you can see on your screen. Next slide, please. Okay, so MRSA. Are we a country that deals with MRSA? Well, I think the slide says it all right? The surveillance, which is the antimicrobial resistance with the ICMR study. If you look at the slide itself, the MRSA, whether it is community acquired or hospital acquired, is not something to be scoffed at. Okay, it says you should take this seriously because we are a country that has MRSA. Now, you may want to treat it differently, and I will talk about that in a little while. But you can't disregard the presence of MRSA. And so, MRSA, it's not going to be any drug that will work for MRSA, but we'll talk about that when you come to treatment. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's start with vancomycin, all right? And vancomycin resistant Staph aureus, which is VRSA. Have a look at the figures on the right hand side. You'll find that it's not again something which is small. In places like Sydney, when you got a VRE or a VRSA in a hospital, the entire ward had to be shut down. The entire ward had to be shut down. That's how seriously these countries will take a VRSA or a VRE, which is vancomycin resistant enterococcus. But we probably don't give it the same kind of importance as it should, because if we should do that, because without doing that, you're probably propagating a subclinical VRSA, which is ultimately at some stage going to become a significant clinical problem. So hospital surveillance and infection control groups should be cautious while they are looking at the gram-negative isolates. They should be also discussing and looking at gram-positive isolates. Next slide, please. All right. So when we say what are the limitations of currently available, anti-MRSA. Linezolid, while it's a good drug, I think those of us who have seen, there are two complications of linezolid. One is that there is a drop in counts, which can happen very commonly. It's also idiosyncratic. It's not dose dependent and it's not time dependent. So it may happen at any time. The second is that linezolid's peripheral neuropathy is a hugely crippling condition. Patients who've got peripheral neuropathy after linezolid, you'll find that they will be suffering for weeks and weeks, sometimes months, and sometimes years. So while it is a good drug, it's a good oral drug, but now there are other options of oral treatment besides linezolid. Next slide, please. Okay, let's have a look at teicoplanin. What are the limitations of teicoplanin? Well, again, it's a good drug, but the activity, the spectrum is actually quite narrow. It's not the kind of drug that you would like to use in a number of conditions, because there are number of organisms in the gram-positive spectrum that it will not cover, and the ones it covers, it will require either a higher dose. There is also a drug that has got a lot of drug-drug interactions. So while it is not a bad drug, you have to select the patient carefully, and that when you've got a critically ill patient in your ICU, this may not be the best choice that you have to use. Next slide, please. Okay, what about clindamycin? Clindamycin is again a terrific drug. Okay, it's a very good cover. It's a good drug. Again, you have to pick your patient carefully. The one big problem is that it's a static drug. It's not a cycle drug. It's not going to kill the bug as it should be. When you say there is a drug that you're using, what you would expect is killing of the bug. What clindamycin will do is that it's going to make it's a bacteriostatic drug, so it will limit the number of colony counts that will multiply before it becomes a clinical infection. It also works, but for clindamycin to start working, you have to use a slightly higher dose. In ICUs, it's very rarely a situation where you will be using something like 300 milligrams 3 times a day. It's often a situation where you'll be using 600. Sometimes I have used up to 900. But at those doses, once you cross the 10 to 14 day period, you're almost certainly going to put your patient into Clostridium difficile, drug-induced colitis, and then that's a new problem. It's a completely new problem. So clindamycin, while it has got its uses, again, like any other drug, you've got to pick the drug carefully. Next slide, please. Okay, resistance profiles of bacteria that can cause complicated and skin and soft tissue infections. This is not only skin and soft tissue, but you find there are a number of bacteria that will cause systemic infections of number of organs. We are starting from the lungs, which are probably the most commonly affected, but anywhere from the brain, the spine, the abscesses that come in the spine, or the gut, the kidneys, bone, muscle, joints, all of them are affected, and that there is a wide spectrum of organisms that may or may not involve a particular organ. So oftentimes we say there's a gram-positive focus that is being seeded in the liver or the kidneys, but you'll find that when you say it is seeding, and a gram-positive is seeding, it is probably already involving another 2+ organs, and that you'll probably find out about that as time goes on. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's have a look at daptomycin. Now, what is the advantage of daptomycin, and what are the disadvantages of daptomycin? Very good drug. Again, one of the biggest problems that I find, and I'd like Dr. Yatin Mehta to comment on this, is that daptomycin, unless your patient's calcium is physiological, it will not work because of its mechanism of action. Daptomycin a patient must have physiological calcium levels, ionized calcium that should be physiological before daptomycin works. So I am often told, we've started with daptomycin, but the treatment has failed. The one big question I need to know from the treating doctor is that, were you measuring the calcium? What is the ionized calcium, and what should you do? That is one. The second thing is, we often started, when we were told that daptomycin started, we often started at 4 milligrams per kilogram, then went on to 6 milligrams per kilogram. But I find that with normal renal functions, I find that unless you're using 8 to 10 milligrams per kilogram, your tissue penetration is going to be suboptimal and inadequate. So we say that the dose of daptomycin should be 350 milligrams once a day. I think what you need in people who are ill in ICU or simply have a bacteremia or you're trying to prevent a bacteremia, that dose becomes 700 milligrams once a day, which is about 8 to 10 milligrams per kilogram of your patient's body weight. These are the two things which are crucial about daptomycin I would like to share. Next slide, please. All right, mechanism of action, as I've already said, this is a very good slide. It talks to you about why daptomycin and how will it work and why it will not work. So it's crucial to have this part of the physiology balanced before the pathology of an organism can be corrected. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, again, it's pretty much a repetition of the previous slides. We'll not go into this. Next slide, please. Okay, the activity of something like daptomycin and those agents that you're going to use based on their in vitro concentration. So again, have a look at where daptomycin is. It's very good concentrations in inflamed tissue. So oftentimes, literature will say that the daptomycin in say gram-positive meningitis, the total amount of penetration is only about across the blood-brain barrier. It's only about 1 to 3%. But in meningitis, when the meninges are inflamed, daptomycin is between 5 to 8%, and even at 5%, it's a reasonably good response anti-meningitis agent. I'm not saying that you should use it, but I am saying that in situations where a center does not have or patients cannot tolerate crystalline penicillin, chloramphenicol, those agents that we normally use in gram-positive meningitis, daptomycin still is a good choice to be considered. Next slide, please. Okay, daptomycin versus vancomycin, clinical success rate. If you look at the 4th, 5th, 6th studies, the lines on your right hand side of your slide, vancomycin, to my mind, is actually a weak cover. It's not the kind of cover that I would use in somebody who's got a bacteremia, gram-positive infection. I would use it in somebody who's got one organ, maybe two organs involved, and in situations where your peak concentration levels may be a little bit up and down. In those situations, yes, I would use vancomycin. I would have to say that one of the safest areas is those people who are on dialysis, where I use vancomycin. It's a dialyzable agent, can be used fairly safely. Other than that, vancomycin, for a long time we used to do, after giving the vancomycin, you would do the peak levels, then you would do the trough levels, and then you would try to validate that based on a patient's recovery. And I found that it doesn't work. Irrespective of how you're trying to structure the peak and trough levels, it's very difficult to say what is actually going to be, the efficacy of vancomycin. So these figures say it all. And again, I would say that vancomycin, while it is a reasonable cover, it's a weak staph cover. Next slide, please. Okay, then again, when you're going to be having, adverse effects in all-cause mortality, have a look at the adverse effects in all-cause mortality, which are clearly the advantage of daptomycin in all of these studies. Is substantial. And so daptomycin, I would have to say, is a very good agent when you're looking at comparative studies in patients who are critically ill. Next slide, please. Okay, high dose, like I was just talking to you, versus standard doses of daptomycin. When I say high dose, it is still therapeutic. 8 to 10 milligram per kilogram is still therapeutic. But in those situations where traditional literature says that 4 milligrams might be enough, 4 is never enough. In sick patients, it's never enough. And that if you're going to use daptomycin, you should not be using any less than 8 milligrams, 6 to 8 milligrams at the very least. Next slide, please. Okay, so in conclusion, I would say that daptomycin, millimole to millimole, in terms of an overall benefit, daptomycin has a significant superiority as compared to other agents. It's a very, very efficacious molecule. Tissue levels are very good. They can be predicted. You can make that a very smooth kind of a transition in patients who have already become very sick, very unwell in your ICU, and that you're probably going to have a reasonably good outcome most times. I can't say all the time, but most times. And so overall, in the overall picture, daptomycin is a very, very good choice to be kept in mind for gram-positive infections in the eyes. I'd like to thank Concord for giving me this opportunity to talk about this molecule. I'd like to thank all of you for a very patient hearing. And if you like, I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Srivastava. Very nice presentation, and also very clearly, defined about the teicoplanin as well as vancomycin and daptomycin. Now, I would like to hand over the floor to Dr. Hitin Saresa for the question answer session. To be discussed with both the speakers, Dr. Hitin Mehta.
Thank you, Anu. And thanks, Dr. Srivastava. Excellent overview, gram-positive sepsis. And like the fungal infections, gram-positive sepsis is also not as much appreciated in India. We all think that India is only the king of gram-negative sepsis. It is not correct. MRSA incidence is going up. It's too much of noise.
Hitin, can you ask everybody to mute themselves?
Yes, please.
The one person who's going to ask the question.
Only I and Dr. Srivastava and the person who's asking question should unmute. Yeah, so are they putting their questions in the chat box?
Dr. Hitin Saresa will discuss those questions, sir. He has got few questions in chat box.
Okay, yeah.
Dr. Hitin, you please take it.
Okay, yeah. You are on mute, Hitin. Yeah, that's better.
Yes, so I want to thank.
We are all going to get ototoxicity because of the noise. Okay, now come. You have limited time. Dr. Srivastava has to run to hospital. Please ask the questions. Yes, Hitin.
Yeah, so now we will proceed for the Q&A session. We have few questions from the doctors. Sir, the first question is, how is your experience with COVID-19 in context with the MRSA?
Hitin, you'll also have to tell me who is the question directed to.
Sir, the question is directed to Dr. Yatin.
No, I mean, we are getting a few gram positives, but in COVID-19, again, secondary sepsis is mostly a gram negative, and literature also reports, and I also found several Candida sepsis in COVID-19 patients. The incidence is about, they say about 10%, not only of Candida, was Aspergillus also. So surprisingly, I'm finding Candida auris in a few patients. So that's a bit of a worry. So if patient is not getting better, PCT is not very high, patient is still septic, I do add empiric antifungal therapy.
Right, sir. Sir, we have next question for Dr. Om Srivastava. Sir mentioned about different doses of daptomycin, the high dose versus the standard dose. So how is your clinical experience with the high dose daptomycin?
Yeah, so it's actually pretty good. My clinical experience with high dose daptomycin is pretty good. And I find that, irrespective of what the literature said 5 years ago, 4 milligrams per kilogram is a suboptimal dose. You probably have to start at something like 6 milligrams, 8 milligrams, and not less than that. So I don't really think it's a high dose, but based on body weight and other parameters, all things being equal, 350 milligrams once a day may not be the best dose to start with, especially if you think that your patient is about to land into ICU or is already in ICU.
Right, sir. Sir, we have next question for Dr. Om Srivastava only. How is the daptomycin resistance prevalent in India, and how is your experience in terms of treating the daptomycin resistant patient?
So, see, if you look at the if you look at the molecular level, it takes dipeptidase, which is the enzyme that modulates the pathways for most gram-positive infections. The dipeptidase, it will take vancomycin 2 steps to get resistant. It will take teicoplanin 4 steps, and it will take daptomycin about 9 or 10 steps to get into resistance. So I don't think that daptomycin resistance is a very common feature. It can happen, but it usually happens when you say resistance, you're probably using a suboptimal dose. You're probably not looking at the drug-drug interactions. You're probably not giving it adequately. Okay, it is something that is given very smoothly as an infusion, even though it is not a butyl-lactamase. It goes very well into tissue levels over about 3 to 4 hours time. So I'm not aware of a classic resistance per se of daptomycin. Most times when I find that people say that it is not working, it's probably because of one of the 3 or 4 reasons that I've just mentioned.
See, occasionally, can I add something, Om?
Yes, sir.
Occasionally, I have seen daptomycin resistance, but it's not very common, as you rightly said. And for the younger colleagues, I would like to point it out that daptomycin is FDA approved only for right-sided endocarditis and not for left-sided endocarditis. Also, daptomycin is not good for pneumonias, gram-positive pneumonias, because the surfactant affects the daptomycin. It deactivates daptomycin, so it's not good for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, sir. Sir, we have next question for Dr. Yatin Mehta. The sir has spoken about different echinocandins in treatment of invasive fungal infection. So how do you differentiate the caspofungin versus micafungin or anidulafungin in terms of patient profile?
See, by and large, if you look at the 3 drugs, they are quite similar. The spectrum is very, very similar. In very simplistic terms, what I normally do is, although Caspo has the largest number of publications because it's an older drug, but NESA does not differentiate between the 3 drugs. So I use all 3 drugs quite a lot. Now, anidulafungin requires a loading dose. Micafungin does not require a loading dose. If the patient has some degree of hepatic dysfunction, I would be a little hesitant to use micafungin. And caspofungin has a problem of more drug interactions compared to the other 2. So actually, anidulafungin and micafungin are almost interchangeable drugs, and they're both quite similar with very little drug-drug interactions and very safe, with very minimal toxicity.
Right, sir. Sir, you have spoken about different echinocandins. So how, if the patient is admitted with COVID-19 and patient subsequently develops invasive fungal infection, then how you proceed for such a case?
See, if it is, with a high degree of suspicion or if there is evidence of aspergillus, then obviously voriconazole remains the drug choice. These patients have not an insignificant incidence of mucor also. I just had a patient of COVID-19 with abdominal mucor. So liposomal amphotericin B remains the drug of choice, and I used along with posaconazole. Although combination of this along with isavuconazole also has been used. Om, would you like to add something to this, or that's?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that voriconazole with invasive aspergillus, to my mind, the rest of the fungus is probably elsewhere. The extrapulmonary manifestations of COVID, if you look at the literature right now, that is mostly about Candida or non-albicans, but only Candida family. Pulmonary, I'd have to say, 70% of fungi in the lungs is going to be aspergillus, and it's not necessarily fumicans. So there's a lot of aspergillus species that are going to be responsive to voriconazole primarily, and I think that should be kept in mind. One thing that we probably miss out is that aspergillus is such a rapidly multiplying fungus that if you see your patient's chest X-ray, in less than 48 hours, the total number of infiltrates will have climbed by about 50%. And I think that that's a good bedside rule of the thumb to keep in mind. Have the infiltrates climbed, and that is the time that you can't wait for starting or having a culture or any kind of tissue, to prove your diagnosis. You will need to have an antifungal therapy that first covers as aspergillus.
Right, sir. Sir, next we have question for Dr. Om Srivastav. Is there a need to launch high dose daptomycin in terms of India? Means should we launch in India?
I think that you simply need to use 2 vials instead of 1. Okay, I think that is the simplest way to say whether you want to launch it or not. I don't think so. I don't think it's not a molecule that needs a huge volume to be given to a patient. You'll probably add another 100 mils of the total amount of fluid that you need to give to the patient. So whether you're giving 350 milligrams or you're giving 700 milligrams, I don't think you need to have a very high volume. So that should be what the current conditions should be sufficient to continue with high dose daptomycin. I'm sorry.
Right, sir. Next question we have for Dr. Yatin Mehta. Vancomycin, it's a dialyzable drug as mentioned by Dr. Om Srivastav in the presentation. How it's different from a teicoplanin if the doctor wants to give teicoplanin in such patients?
No, I think that the spectrum of the two drugs are similar. If the patient is already on dialysis, vancomycin is a cheap drug. So there's no harm in giving vancomycin, I would say. Otherwise, teicoplanin from the nephrotoxicity is a much superior drug. So if the patient has AKI, I prefer teicoplanin compared to vancomycin. Otherwise, the activity is similar. Both are bactericidal. And teicoplanin, the only thing is that many of these patients in the ICU will have thrombocytopenia, which is more common with teicoplanin. Significantly there.
Dr. Om Srivastav, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the thrombocytopenia can actually be a unicellular, feature of sepsis, especially if you're dealing with more than 1 gram negative organism. So thrombocytopenia is not a contraindication, but you've got to be careful when you're using teicoplanin. Vancomycin, like I said, it's for a very mild kind of a staph cover, if indeed you think you're dealing with staph. There are other gram-positives which may or may not respond to something like vancomycin or teicoplanin. Look, I think you have to keep in mind that when you've got, Dr. Mehta will probably, I'd like his comments on this. When you've got a septic patient, the volume of distribution becomes very different. That means the total amount of extracellular compartment fluid that is available is not going to be the same as if it was in a non-septic patient. And that's why your dosing has to be very accurate, very appropriate. So when you say, can you use 1 gram twice a day of vancomycin? Well, you can, but then you're putting your patient up for a lot of complications. Can you use a higher dose of teicoplanin? Yes, you can do that as well. But if you've got a unicellular thrombocytopenia line in sepsis, then you're putting your patient up for complications. You're then best advised to use a molecule that will be far safer. So daptomycin comes into that kind of category. You're not going to be using linezolid in these conditions. And the daptomycin comes in that category where it almost becomes like an automatic choice.
Also, not only the volume of distribution is changed or high, but also in the clearance of the drug can be higher because the GFR is increased initially 1 or 2 days before the patient gets into AKI because of hyperdynamic circulation. So that also has to be taken into consideration when you dose your patient.
Thank you, Dr. Yatin Mehta and Dr. Om Srivastav for the clarification. So this was the end for the Q&A session. I want to thank once again all the speakers, Dr. Yatin Mehta and Dr. Om Srivastav, as well as the participants on the behalf of Concord Biotech Limited. Thank you all for sparing your valuable time and having such an enlightening session.
Hiten and Anup, what I would like to hear the next time we have a webinar, I'd like to hear Dr. Yatin Mehta talk about Candida auris and the role of a molecule called Ibrexafungerp. Right? It may not be in your portfolio right now, but I'd like to hear his thoughts about drug-resistant Candida auris, drug-resistant Candida auris bacteremia, and what is the role of Ibrexafungerp.
Sure, sir. We have noted down and we definitely would organize this webinar on this topic very soon. And on behalf of Concord Biotech Limited, I, Anup Dixit, would like to convey our many thanks to Dr. Yatin Mehta sir, Dr. Om Srivastava sir, and all doctors, those who are participants here, attended this webinar online. And thanks to the organizer and my marketing team for this particular webinar. Many thanks to all of you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.